Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher.
There are a number of Catholic practices for Lent, which a lot of people don't understand. And I mean, mostly secular people and some Protestants look at this, the practices, like fasting on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday, enforcing technically speaking, it's allowing no exceptions to the not eating meat on Friday thing, but not eating meat on Fridays. And then there's some other things too, which are related. I'm not going to get into the way that, say, the Greek Orthodox would look at it in the other way, saying it's kind of ridiculously little, because they go really hardcore, like the Orthodox sort of turn into vegans as a penitential act for Lent. But it's the same principle behind both. The Western modern Catholic version has to be described admittedly a bit candy-assed. Still, nonetheless, for people who are completely unused to asceticism, it can actually be a little bit hard. And so I want to address, why the heck do we do this? What's the purpose of it? And so there are actually two purposes to a penitential season like Lent. So the first of them is penance. The second of them is what you might describe as spiritual exercise. So I want to talk about that one first, because it's relatively straightforward and easy to understand. So in the same sense that physical exercise is doing something difficult so that you get better at it. So you do push-ups in order to get stronger at doing push-ups, or do pull-ups so that you can do more pull-ups. You lift heavy things so that you can then lift heavier things. It's a basic principle of how you get better at stuff. Physically speaking, there's some details about breaking down the muscle in order to rebuild itself. But there's still the same basic principle at work when you do something like deny yourself some food that you like. There's also giving up something for Lent is a good example of that, by the way. It's again the idea is that you take something that is good, that you enjoy, and then you, for the period of Lent, don't enjoy it. And the purpose to this is to get yourself practice with not having good things, with being denied something that you would like. And then this builds up essentially what you might describe as spiritual muscle. But what it does is it builds up your ability to go without something that you like and be okay. Because what's the first reaction one tends to have when deprived of something one likes? To be grouchy, to be irritable, to be unhappy, to be constantly thinking about it, to stop being as good as you normally would be because you're so focused on the thing that you're used to that you don't have. By specifically choosing to take things that are good, that you like, and simply go without them for a while. Now, obviously, this is stuff that's not essential, not like, water, but, good things that you can go without, that you're accustomed to, and going without them, you get used to that sort of deprivation, to not having all that you could have. And as such, when these things come about, not because you're deciding to give something up, but because for some reason you can't, well, you've actually gotten used to going without things that are valuable to you, things that you enjoy, so that you actually have some practice at going, okay, yeah, not great, I'll deal. And the more you do this sort of stuff, the better you get at that sort of reaction. Like, yeah, it's unpleasant, I'll deal. And then you can go on being good to the people around you instead of focusing on yourself and what you're missing. So that's the idea of essentially spiritual exercise, spiritual push-ups. They teach you how to be good in spite of the various sorts of suffering that may come along. And this is a very useful activity. And by the way, you can see a very direct analog to this in all sorts of sports. In all sorts of sports, the actual act of participating in the sport kind of sucks. It hurts to use your muscles at their maximum limit. Whether you're running or rowing or whatever, you're going to be hurting while you do it. And so one of the things athletes train to do is push themselves in ways that really hurt, so they get used to it hurting. Like when I was in high school, I did crew, the rowing crew. And you get all sorts of blisters. I mean, it hurts. And like when you're at the end of, crew is fundamentally a sprint, though it's a several minute sprint. But so especially the shorter races, like the 1500 meters, at the end of it, like your forearms would just be on fire. They'd be killing you. And it's funny, they'd have so filled up with blood that you'd go like this and your skin wouldn't go in. It was just so distended with blood because every bit of force you're putting onto that oar is going through your forearms. It hurt. It hurt a lot. if you're doing that, if it hurts for the first time in a race, you're going to lose. So you practice things that hurt while you're practicing them, so you get used to it. So you're in the race, it's like, yeah, okay, this hurts. I'm still going to push hard on this oar. Well, pull, technically, during the power stroke. And so it's exactly the same sort of thing. When you want to be good at something that may involve suffering, and pretty much everything in this world does, one of the things you have to practice is enduring suffering. So right there, this is just, instead of having a very narrow goal, like in a sport, where you train to do something even though, you train for some particular sorts of suffering so that you can push through them and achieve that end. This is a general sort of thing, so that whatever happens in life, you can push through it and still do good to people, instead of turning grouchy and crabby and self-centered. So that's a spiritual exercise. The other aspect to it is the penitential aspect. And now this gets to the idea of justice. And one of the central ideas within Christianity is that of substitutionary atonement. Substitutionary meaning substituting, and atonement meaning to make things better, but to atone specifically for things that you did wrong. The grandest, biggest, most important substitutionary atonement is that of Christ for human sin. That Christ, sinless, took on the sins of the world and then suffered the punishment for sin, crucifixion. And in so doing, he has atoned for sins that were not his, because he didn't have any sins of his own. This is the biggest substitutionary atonement. However, all people can both atone for their own sins, that's kind of a little bit more straightforward, but also take part through Christ in this substitutionary atonement. It is possible to join one's sufferings, voluntarily accepted, to the sufferings of Christ in atoning for the sins of the world, such that a person who has not done anything wrong can still do penance for someone who has. Now, the thing that tends to get very confusing to secular people whose horizons are entirely on the secular world is that they tend to assume that this means that, like, you get punished so the other person gets off scot-free in a practical sense, and that's not really what's meant. There is an element in which temporal punishment, within the world as it's presently being assembled through time in creation, might be lessened, where you might get some amount of mercy and reduction of punishment because of substitutionary atonement. A classic example of this being where something where there's a fine, a person can pay a fine for somebody else. That is a thing. However, this doesn't mean that a person who, say, murders somebody else does penance, then they get off. Woohoo. That's not really what's meant. Because you still have all sorts of practical considerations involved in a person who has done bad things. You have to be careful of them. They may be able to redeem themselves in a practical sense, but they may be able to, they may not be able to, depending upon the things and what sort of trust is broken and so on. I'm speaking generally here. But you still have to be careful of them, and for a lot of things, if a person's got some sort of vice, you probably can't trust them in certain ways afterwards. So they can redeem themselves in the broader sense of still being a member of society in some capacity, but not necessarily in going back to it as if nothing had happened. They may never be able to be trusted again in certain regards. Now, so that's not what's really being talked about, but the thing is, this isn't all that there is. Life before death is only a portion of creation. And the big thing is that after the end of this world, once this world ends, the assembly of things in time, in the beginning, comes to an end. There then comes the period of the fullness of it. We are partial, but we're coming into fullness. Heaven, loosely speaking. And so here we come again to the part, I keep on bringing up purgatory, but in order to be happy, you have to be good. You can't be evil and unhappy. It's inherently impossible, because happiness is the fulfillment of your nature, and goodness is acting according to your nature. So you can't act not according to your nature and have your nature be fulfilled. It's intrinsically impossible to be happy and evil. And so this is why salvation consists not just of remitting a punishment, but of fixing us. Now, part of the fixing of us is that right now we're very separated from each other, especially given the fall. We are fallen creatures, and fallen creatures are very, very separated from each other. We don't really we don't know each other's experiences. Even when we communicate them, we mostly don't understand each other very well. We have a lot of imperfections that keep us from really being in a community together. However, after death, this changes. Things that are now veiled over become unveiled. In St. Paul's language, I see now as through a mirror dimly, but then we'll see face to face. And remember, by the way, in St. Paul's time, mirrors were not the really high quality mirrors we have now, where you take glass and you have the silver, and so you get that like really perfectly reflective quality. Mirrors tended to be much more along the lines of things like where you take a piece of glass and their glass wasn't nearly as optically clear, and then you paint it black on the other end, on the other side, so that the reflection of the glass itself is what's coming through. That's the typical sort of mirror you'd be thinking of. So when he said through a mirror dimly, mirrors showed you things, but they didn't show them in the same sort of optical clarity that a modern mirror will. So bear that in mind. And so now we see this, but then we will see each other face to face. We will see very clearly. We will know what actually happened. We will know how other people felt, how things actually impacted them. And in that knowledge, the things that, the times when we had the opportunity to do good and didn't take it will be painful. And moreover, all of the things where we were doing wrong will be painful to us when we can really see them clearly. Here we lie to ourselves constantly. I mean, lies are at the bottom of all sin. The lie that, oh, this is going to make me happy. This is going to be good. Good things will come of this. And they don't. And then we keep lying to ourselves often. Or sometimes we, actually see it and then we regret it. But either way, sin is built upon lies. And when truth becomes unavoidable, lies become impossible. And so we will then have the various, pains of when we were so attached to getting what we wanted, whether it be, sins of the flesh or spiritual sins. And then this is something that's going to need to be fixed. And so in this fixing, the primary salvific action is, of course, Christ. However, God is always bringing us into him. You can see this in the fact that we can do anything whatsoever with each other, that we can impact each other in any way, shape, or form. Because you could, of course, imagine a whole bunch of creatures all just directly communicating with God and receiving nothing from each other, interacting with each other in no way. And every good thing they have comes directly from God, and that would work. That's not what God created for us. There might be, for all we know, a bunch of creatures where that is true. But we don't interact with them, so we don't know. But we interact with each other, and as such, God delegates to us some of his goodness, so that, when somebody's hungry and we give them food, we are being God's feeding of this person, and so God incorporates us into his goodness in this fashion. So, in that same sort of way, just look around creation, you can see that one of the major themes is delegation. It is God who gives the goodness, but he does it through us so that we become part of his gift. In the same way, it is Christ who saves us, but he gives it to us to also cooperate with him in this salvation so that we can become part of his saving action. God always incorporates us into himself. That's one of the gifts that he gives us. And so, by taking on penance yourself for somebody else, penance in excess of your own sins, because unlike Christ, we aren't sinless, and so we do need to atone for ourselves too. Again, not that we win our own salvation, but that we are joined. We need to atone for ourselves in the sense of joining we need to straight out. We do atone for our own sins in the sense of joining to Christ's atonement of us. But what we do in excess of our own sins can be given to another through Christ in joining to Christ's salvific action. And so at the end of time, when things become clear, we will help each other to fix our problems by having gone through penitential actions. So in the moment, something like not eating meat on Fridays, there's sort of a big whoop aspect to it. Like, so what? But for some people, this is hard. For some people, this isn't easy. Fasting, for example, even the Catholic way, where you just have, one meal in the day, and you're permitted up to, if you have to have them, 2 snacks that put together don't equal a meal. It's not that easy. If you do it. Like, if you're used to, if you're used to fasting, it's not that hard. First time I did it, man, it was hard to get through. These days, it's kind of it takes a little bit of planning, but mostly it's, having the right attitude, and it's not that bad these days. There are people who do much, the hardcore fast where they don't eat food or drink water. There's a little bit of toning down to that because it's, for reasons I won't really get into, but to have some moderation in it. But fasting in that Catholic fashion of one meal and no other food, if at all possible, 2 small snacks if you really have to, in the day, it's not easy. But for some people, it's really hard. And the thing is, you don't know from the outside which it is, but at the end of time, when all becomes made plain, we will know. And those who are doing that full action will have a lot to give in this, in terms of that sharing of experience, which will happen when we all see each other, in that metaphorical sense, face to face. So, that's one of the big things to bear in mind with substitutionary atonement, is that a lot of it is not really about now. Because, if I fast, for the sake of somebody else right now, they don't really know it. I mean, I can tell them, but they don't know it in any full sense. But at the end of time, when things are really revealed, they will actually be able to share in that in a more real sense. And so much of penitential action is intended not for the moment, when we can't really share it very well, but for that end of time, when people will be truly reconciled to each other, become good, become reconciled to God, and finally be able to be truly happy. And so in this substitutionary atonement, or the penitential action which we perform, it's really only partially about now, and largely about the age to come. So, I hope this helps to make sense of it. It's not really an action that you see secular people doing, because it doesn't make a whole lot of secular sense. And so I hope the context of it helps to explain that, what it's about. And until next time, may you hit everything you aim at.